Right now, you think things are fine. I think things are fine. And I can guarantee you they are not.
Everything's coming up roses, according to the musician Moby in the opening of the new romantic comedy, Endgame 2050.
That's no comedy, but it is a love story for the planet. Things are not so fine, but Endgame 2050, which is a documentary, Dave, tells us what we can do about it on this episode of the Growth Busters podcast.
Calling, 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 calling. Call the Growth Busters. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Welcome to the Growth Busters podcast. Here we discuss our society's addiction to growth, and we do our best to chart a sustainable course for human civilization. Why? Because we've got a planet to save.
And a civilization.
You bet. Hi, I'm Dave Gardner, director of the documentary Growth Busters Hooked on Growth, the tireless, unstoppable champion for planet Earth.
And I'm Erica Arias, co-host and co-producer of the Growth Busters podcast. I might just be even more tireless and unstoppable than Dave. At least, that's my aspiration. Learn more about our unsustainable love affair with growth and what we can do about it at growthbusters.org.
So before we get to our important guest, I cannot wait. We usually do a little bit of listener feedback, and this episode it is very little, but it's still worth sharing. And that is, I've got an email from Pam in Irvine, California, who wrote, "Thanks for your Overpopulation and Growth Busters podcasts. I'm making my way through them to get myself up to speed on the overshoot situation." Overshoot. That reminds me, Erica, that Earth Overshoot Day is coming up 1 month from the day we're recording this episode, August 22nd this year, Earth Overshoot Day. And I want to mention in the self-promotion category that I've done a 2020 update to the Conversation Earth special that we produced last year about Overshoot. It's called Welcome to Overshoot, Have a Nice Day, and it's designed for radio stations to air. And so if you're a fan of this podcast, if you appreciate what we're doing, I'd just like to ask you a small favor, and that is to recommend to your local public or community radio station that they air the 1-hour Conversation Earth special about Overshoot Day. They can find everything they need on the Public Radio Exchange, prx.org. And if you'd like to listen to that, you can find it at conversationearth.org. We did a whole series, 42 episodes, and now this 1-hour special, so it's sort of turned into a podcast now, but radio stations are still welcome to air those episodes. So conversationearth.org, please get your local station to run that special so that more people can get up to speed on Overshoot.
Also, was that Pam from Irvine? That's really exciting because it looks like we're neighbors. I'm also in Irvine, California. Definitely right back to us, Pam. That's exciting.
Right around the corner, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm always excited when a new film is released that might wake some of us up about the unsustainable way we're living today and offer some alternatives. And that film today is Endgame 2050. You can see it free. It was released in late May. You can find it on YouTube, Amazon Prime, Tubi TV, Hoopla, and at endgame2050.com. I'm pretty impressed with the list of languages that you can get subtitles to. So this is really intended to be seen around the world. It is that important a film. There are subtitles in Spanish, French, German, Italian, Arabic, Hindi, Japanese, Portuguese, and Indonesia. And you're probably adding more every week.
That's right. And today we're thrilled to welcome the mastermind behind this film, physician by day, nonprofit hero, and filmmaker by night, Sofia Pineda Ochoa. Sofia wrote, produced, and directed the film Endgame 2050. Welcome, Sofia.
Thank you so much. But no hero here. You must be talking about another Sofia.
Dave and I would strongly disagree. You're our hero.
And probably the hero of just about anyone else who sees the film. In fact, I'm trying to think. I watched it on YouTube, and weren't there something like 187,000 views or something like that, right? You're way up there.
I think it's like 182,000 right now, last I checked.
She's like, no big deal, you know.
Oh.
That's huge. A lot of documentaries never see that number of eyeballs ever.
It's awesome.
I'm very grateful. You know, it was my biggest fear making this film that nobody would see it. Because, like, it was such a big effort to make it. And it was like, oh my God, this film, I paid for all of it out of my pocket. Like, every single expense, every single lawyer clearance, every single license. And I was like, please don't let it be seen only like by 3 people. So I was so happy that it doesn't sound like a lot, 180,000, but I'm hoping that it'll keep getting viewed and that it'll help raise awareness. So I am happy about that.
Well, that is a lot for a documentary, and I'm even that much more in awe that you dug in and bankrolled the whole thing yourself, so you are definitely a hero.
You are.
No hero, just obsessive and, about doing things.
That's a great segue to really our first question, and that is, what is it that made you decide to dig into your pocketbook and make this film?
Well, I've been interested in environmental kind of issues for a long time. In the last, 5 years, 6 years, I had a focus more specifically in one issue related to consumption with regards to animal products and their impact in the environment. I have a small nonprofit where I just put out educational content for those topics. But I always kind of wanted to do something that covered more as a big picture situation. I always felt that with limited small videos, I couldn't quite convey everything I wanted to convey. I'm from Mexico, if you notice my thick accent. I came here on a physician's work visa 10 years ago, and I had multiple different sponsorships and visas just from different employers. And it was at one point about 2.5 years ago when I was finally allowed to not be working full time. And so that was when I was like, okay, now I can finally not have to be in chains. It felt like that evening, the evening where I finally was allowed to apply for my adjustment of status, I was like, okay, now I finally have time. I'm gonna work on a feature-length documentary and I'm gonna do it.
Who knew you can make a world-class documentary in your spare time, 5 or 10 minutes every night, have it done in no time flat?
Yeah, no, you can't. It was when I was working full-time, I couldn't, so I don't think you can. You probably can, but it would probably take a long time, It's just so much work.
Yeah. So I guess you kind of snuck in the back door of this because apparently you kind of became an activist, I take it, about giving up eating animals and going to a plant-based diet. Is that kind of what brought you in?
I think so. Some people ask me, what was a turning point? They asked me for my aha moment. And I'm never able to provide an aha moment. It just kind of happened more gradually. I remember when I was in high school, I guess I was 17 or 18. I won second place in public speaking about the environment. And at that time I was vegetarian. And then I stopped being vegetarian. So, and then I finally went back because I was vegetarian, I think because just my mother was telling me, but I didn't really understand the reason behind it. But the point is, I guess the full scope of the environment, it was getting active and doing activism on the environment with regards to animal products, which kind of was a segue into kind of looking at the big disastrous picture that we find ourselves in.
So are you vegan or vegetarian?
I am vegan. I've been vegan for about, 8 years or so.
Awesome. And your mom is an influence. That's really nice to have a family member that's supportive of this and also understands why it's important.
Yeah. She was vegetarian at the time. Now she's vegan because I made her. I imposed my beliefs on her. And I made her a vegan.
I'm going to need some help with that. How to get through to moms.
Erica, I'm trying to remember, weren't you a pescatarian?
No, actually. I had been vegetarian since middle school. I stopped eating meat in 7th grade, and then that slowly transitioned into veganism. So I eliminated all animal products from my diet, and then college hit.
Pizza.
Exactly. That's what happened. So I tried to reduce...
Vegan pizza.
Vegan pizza, I know. To be perfectly honest, I was eating really just for convenience because I was so busy with school, and so I feel horrible about it. I'm still on that path of trying to figure out how to transition back into it because it's not so hard giving up meat, but I find that when I do that, I will eat more cheese or, it's a process. So I'm actually really excited to look at your website that you have to kind of help with that transition.
meetyourfuture.com, and that's MEAT. It looks like some really good resources for someone who's introducing themselves to veganism. Sophia, did you become a vegan in order to help keep us from driving human civilization right off a cliff, or for other reasons?
It was kind of all three things, I mean, I am a physician and I am aware of the impact it has on our health. And contrary to what I kind of grew up believing, that it's very beneficial to eat animal foods and to eat milk and cheese and all those things for your health, it's actually not. And we fare better with the plant-based diet. And also, I am not going to lie that I'm not an ethical vegan. I also, feel very strongly about the animals. And if we don't have to harm them, I don't think that we should. And as you saw in the movie, I've been to slaughterhouses and
yeah, and I could see you were fighting back the tears right there on the film when you were talking about that.
oh yeah, my legs were kind of jello. I thought they were gonna fall.
I'm glad you left that in. I'm glad nobody talked you into doing a take 10 or take 12 of that one.
Yeah.
I really appreciated that as well. And the way that you spoke about the cow in the movie, I'm not going to give a spoiler alert here for anybody who hasn't seen the movie yet, but I tend to do the same thing. I look at animals as people, and how can you say that you love animals if you're eating them? It doesn't make sense. And as somebody who still, I will admit, it's not something I'm proud of, but I do still have chicken in my diet, and it's something that I really want to try to eliminate completely, because if we really want to stand by our values and what we say that we believe in, our actions have to match.
I agree, and we tend to kind of disassociate it or just not think about it, because most of people are not there like watching the animals, fight for their lives, and so I think that's what makes it so easy to just, we don't even call them salami, what is that anyway, ham. Yeah, so that's something that I feel like strongly about.
More people should visit slaughterhouses. Maybe that would help. I think it would certainly help me. But, scare tactics work on me. Dave knows all about this.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, if that was at every elementary school field trip, there'd be a lot more people on a plant-based diet. But circling back to the film, which certainly doesn't make us completely leave the topic of veganism, but let's leave it for a minute. We played just a real brief bit of Moby in the tease for this episode from the opening of the film. How did Moby, the musician, come to be involved in this film?
Well, the only way nobody like me gets in touch with somebody like him, just through his agents. I had actually...
Oh, I thought you were going to tell us you stalked him.
No. Like I said, just through an agent. And I had actually wanted him to be the narrator. I didn't want myself to be the narrator. I wanted him to be the narrator because in my mind I was like, he's someone recognizable, and listen to him, who am I? But it was not possible to do that. And so first I was like, we won't be able to get Moby. But then I just insisted. I was like, well, what about just an interview to his agents? Well, can we just do an interview? I know narration, just a short interview. We'll just go to wherever he wants. Mm-hmm. And so when they finally agreed to that, I had already finished the film, like start to finish. But I still, was happy that I could incorporate him because I thought that he spoke in a very direct way. Every piece that I incorporated of Moby was something that I decided to take out, So it was kind of like, oh, I guess I have to get rid of this. And now I have to get rid of this because I didn't want to make it like over an hour and a half. So it wasn't like he's my buddy and he's like, oh, Sophia, let me help you with your film. No, it was just, through his agent, just like an interview that he was so kind to grant us of his time.
But you reached out to him because you knew this was an area of interest to him?
Yeah, exactly. Because I've seen him, post about these issues. I think he's been doing it for a long, long time. So I thought that this would be something that he would be okay with doing.
Clearly he got on board because he made some pretty compelling statements. Good contribution to the film.
Excellent. Yeah, I really am very grateful for his contribution. Very grateful.
Same. Kind of just adding on to that, Sophia, there were a number of really prominent figures in the film, too, that I recognized. In addition to Moby, Dr. Paul Ehrlich, Dr. Malcolm Potts, just really great voices in the film that I'm so glad that they were willing to speak about this and contribute to the project. But can I ask, what were some of their initial reactions when you reached out to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think these people are so concerned about the environment and they're so genuine about their concern about all these issues that I think that when you tell them, oh, I'm making this documentary about these issues, I think a lot of them are, willing to give you just an hour of their time for an interview. So that was the reaction. Not everyone, I actually reached out to a lot of scientists that were like, no, if I don't have full editorial of the film, no. But I am grateful for the ones that we have in there.
Did anybody say no because of the subject matter? Maybe conversation about population where they just chose not to participate because of that?
Well, when I reached out to them, and this wasn't like in a way like trying to trap or mislead anyone in any way, but I just presented, and it is the truth, as an environmental documentary. Like, I didn't spell out every single issue that I was gonna cover in the documentary. And I didn't mean it like in a misleading way or anything. I just thought that, they're busy lives and they don't want to be like, seeing. And also because I wasn't sure, what things we might leave in, what things we might leave out. There were a lot of things that I unfortunately had to take out, like coral reefs and things like that, which just the time didn't allow, because it was just getting so long. So they didn't have an opportunity to be freaked out by population.
That was smart, yeah. You didn't lie to them. You just didn't give them a long list of things to look through to see if they had an objection to any of them. So very smart.
Yeah.
But to be fair, like everyone who I included in the chapter of population growth are people who are very outspoken about those issues anyway. So honestly, I think that if I had brought it up, I think that they would have all been actually happy. Every single one I included in that chapter was very outspoken.
Knowing what you know now after the film Planet of the Humans got beat up about its discussion of population, do you think you would be a little bit more concerned about whether you would get all those yeses? In fact, I wonder, after that film got beat up, just because they brought up the subject of population, they were accused of racism, totally without foundation at all. I can see how that might make future scientists, ask a lot more questions before they say, sure, I'll be interviewed in your film.
Well, hopefully that issue about them getting beat up is more just like what you would expect with anything that has a good amount of viewership. I mean, the way I see it is if you're not getting a lot of pushback and hate, it's like nobody's watching your film. Even when I was doing activism related to other issues, like with animal foods, I would post like a video about a physician talking about weight loss on a plant-based diet, and they would accuse me of fat shaming. How is this like fat shaming? I'm just providing information, trying to help people. But go back to your question. So I think that the conversation, it's just disgraceful how they just get this labeling, like, for example, like racism. Like, it has nothing to do with racism. Nobody's talking about any race. We're talking about the human species, not about one race or another. But I think that is a shame, and it also kind of speaks to how, not to be negative or anything, but it's funny how you would see a film like Planet of the Humans and look at all the issues that they are presenting. How is it possible that you're supposed to be the rational, logical creature and you see that, and what you get upset about is that they mentioned race? But I think most people who criticize Planet of the Humans, they did so on some of the figures for some of their energy sources were a little bit outdated. Not that it makes it wrong, but they just kind of cling down to that situation, unfortunately, because I think that the film makes a really good point in that we're not, transitioning to renewables in a way that is realistic, with our levels of energy that we're consuming. So I don't think that would play a very important role in scientists that are not keeping up with all the news of who said and who accused everyone of doing one thing or another,
Yep. Well, and I don't want to spend a lot of your time talking about someone else's film, although we are all in this together. But since we're talking about overpopulation potentially, or population growth being this third rail in some cases, I was really pleased to see you bring that up. There's a part of the film where you talk about the fact that most environmental organizations avoid the subject. They don't talk about it enough, if at all.
They think it's a third rail. I mean, it's such a disservice to everything. to all of the causes that any environmental organization may be trying to pursue or help, from conservation to plastic waste to everything, the fact that it's been a poor job of communicating the dire situation of overpopulation that we find ourselves in, to the point that it's almost like controversial. Like, they're like, what? Overpopulation? Oh no, we're not overpopulated. Like, even environmental organizations, they like push back. Like, it's such a simple issue. It's so obvious. Like, I remember a physician texted me after the release of my film. He was like, no, the overpopulation thing, it's a lot more complex. I have to send you these articles. It's more complex. And I replied to him and I said, listen, maybe the solution is complex, but the problem is quite simple. We're too many people consuming too many resources. And it's clear as day in every single environmental issue that you look at, from soil degradation to the carbon emissions, to the way that we are overfishing the oceans and depleting them. It's just so clear, and it just baffles me how that's even considered in any way controversial. Even the United Nations, nobody's clear. Like, they'll talk about World Population Day, but nobody's clear as to saying, hey guys, we're overpopulated. It's just simple. Nobody's suggesting this, nobody's suggesting that, nobody's suggesting genocide, we just need to be mindful. We need to be aware of our situation, because unless we are aware, we can't do anything to solve it. And there's no awareness if we're just not clear.
So there you go, being my hero again. Welcome to the club, because apparently you're a member of a very small group of us who are missing the gene that makes it so invisible and unclear. We're cursed with the ability to see the simple fact. And in fact, I want to take a second and share just a moment from the film. It'll just be audio only since we're doing a podcast. I think you really made a nice, clear statement that I think sums it up really well, and I'd like to share that with our listeners.
And for the benefit of all humans, including today's children and future generations to come, I think we have a moral obligation to raise awareness about the unsustainability of our current population growth rate and the importance of slowing that rate down, as well as changing our consumption patterns so that we avoid irreparably depleting and destroying the very environmental systems on which we humans and all other species depend.
Bravo.
There's no human health without planetary health. You can focus on just one issue or another with regards to human health, but if we don't have a planetary health, it's just all pointless. And like I said, there's nothing controversial about it. As our numbers increase, the species are in a free fall. So many of them, the wildlife, the insects themselves. I think I read in a journal last year that the biomass is decreasing by 2.5% per year. And at that rate, we're projected to not have any insects, or very significant decrease in 100 years.
Wouldn't take long, yeah.
Right on the dot, yeah. And that's just it. It's that every single discipline out there, and you're a doctor, you know this. I'm sure you're surrounded by doctors who look at things from a purely biological health viewpoint. And you can do that, but you also have to understand that none of that would be possible if we don't have the environment to support it. We don't have a healthy planet to support any activity that we want to do. Just our very existence is intertwined with the health of the environment. And it's such a simple concept.
It is a disaster. It is nothing short of an epic environmental disaster. And it's very sad to me that it's just not being communicated in a clear way, from anyone, not even environmental organizations. I feel not even perhaps the United Nations, and it doesn't serve anyone. It doesn't serve the animals. It doesn't serve the environment. It doesn't serve humans. Let me give you an example, and not to pinpoint on anyone, but just to illustrate with an example. You're familiar with the actor Alec Baldwin?
Mm-hmm.
He's a great actor. I just read recently that he's about to have his baby number 6, and congratulations to him. I'm happy for him and the health of everyone and his family, and that's so wonderful. But in my mind, I think, somebody who's so concerned about the environment in so many ways. I think he even sits on the board of PETA or something like that. He's been such an advocate for animals and in so many ways. And I am sure that his wife, I would assume, she has all the means in the world to determine the number and spacing of the children. And so I feel that sometimes, like with the United Nations, and they just focus on, like they say, well, if we lift people out of poverty, then it's all going to go away on itself. Everything's going to solve on itself. And it's immensely important that we not be in poverty and that women have rights. That's the human right in itself. It's super important. But it's also important to communicate the fact that we're overpopulated, because I feel like some people would take different decisions with regard to their family size. And I think that's just an example. You know, like when people say, oh, you know, it's just giving women's rights, which are super important. But we also need to communicate it clearly. I mean, come on, you know, don't you feel like he would perhaps make different decisions? He's about to have baby number 6.
He's up there with Elon Musk, you know, but that goes like hand in hand with this idea that technology is going to save us all. And of course, somebody like Elon Musk probably has like grand ideas about how he's going to save the world.
Mars and stuff.
Yeah, but I'm glad you brought that up, because there is a long list of well-educated, affluent, empowered people in the overdeveloped world who have large families, and you have to think, well, they probably don't know about overpopulation because everybody's been afraid to talk about it.
They don't have a clue.
Yeah.
And why would they know, honestly? If somebody just mentions it and people like jump over them, or if people don't communicate it clearly. You see a documentary on like Netflix. I saw a documentary, like they have a thing on water. And it's like at the end, they say we have to respect water. It's like, okay, well, that doesn't, we have to, you know what I mean? Like, doesn't take like concrete actions. Like, you need to do this, you need to, you know, maybe they just.
No, I'm with you on that. Like, solutions focused. If there's a problem, like, we have to find a solution. We can't just be fine with, well, it'll just work out on its own. You just got to respect water. It's so ineffective.
Yeah. Or did you watch the Our Planet series from Attenborough on Netflix too? So beautiful. It's like nature porn, just beautiful clips, you know, millions and millions of dollars. But not one single thing about anything, about real issues, about, hey, you have to stop doing this, you have to do this, you know, we're overpopulated, we're consuming too much. Nothing. And it's like, so you don't blame people like who are trying to help the environment and they have no idea about population. That doesn't help anyone or anything, so.
I like that you called it nature porn, because I like to call it like the Instagram of the environment. It only showcases the most beautiful, amazing parts of nature, but what's really happening. Most people don't see what's really happening, all the pollution and the beaches and...
Yeah, the real nature porn is in this film, Endgame 2050. I mean, there are some disturbing images. I won't tell people it's a tough film to watch, but there are a few tough scenes. But I don't want to give people the impression that this is just a film about overpopulation. This is a film that definitely gives human population its due, but you also do a pretty good job of bringing in, you know, the rest of the sustainability equation. And in fact, there's this clip I want to share, another clip, and this was a moment with Malcolm Potts where he just astonished me. Here I am, I'm a guy who's been the Caped Crusader trying to save the planet for 15 years, and I had never really done the math that Malcolm Potts did, and this will blow you away. So let me share this real quick.
The impact of human beings on the planet doubles every 17 years. That is, if you take the rate of population growth and add to it the rate of economic growth and put those two things together, we make twice the impact on the planet every 17 years. And you can't do that for many doublings before you destroy the planet.
Doubling every 17 years. I had just never put the two together to do the math.
You have to put them together, because I was trying to find it, because, you know, I didn't want to put anything that I didn't fact check myself, you know. I don't want to say that this movie with all these like inconsistent sources. I couldn't find it, and I emailed him. I was like, where did you get this number? I'm trying to, and he explained to me how he got it and the sources for the two that he put together, and it totally added up. And so, yeah, can you imagine twice the impact every 17 years? He says you can't do that for many doublings before you destroy the planet.
Now, you put that clip in the film, but you didn't spend any other time really in the film addressing our obsession with economic growth. You sort of left that on the cutting room floor. Any particular thinking there?
No, I know that it's a problem, but I just feel like it's like a harder sell to tell people you have to kind of restructure, you know what I mean? And I just felt that just focusing on the environment, but I know that that's something that we need to address, you know, like I had so many things that I was so passionate about that I wanted to talk about in the film that I was just like, I'll just leave that to the Growthbusters.
Yeah, you chose your battles. Yeah, and it's a beautiful film, so maybe you'll do a sequel. Maybe the sequel you'll run economic growth up the flagpole and unsalute it.
Absolutely.
I guess on biodiversity, or maybe we're backtracking a little bit, but you say in the film, in the past 40 years, we've lost about half of all wildlife. And that's not something that I focus on, not even on a, weekly basis. I don't think about it.
That's because you live in LA. Where is the wildlife?
At a zoo, which I never visit. I hate zoos. But no, I mean, I'm definitely more focused on the population and the decision to remain child-free, which we'll get into a little bit later on this episode. But that really stuck out to me, and I think it was super important to include something like that. Just a simple statement like that can really capture somebody's attention, and it'll really make them think twice. I'm going to pick a favorite example. My favorite animal, like forever. I love tigers. They are my favorite. If I could be a tiger, I would be. Just some advice for someone who says, Erica, tigers are cool and all, but does it really matter if the species goes extinct? Why do we really need lions and tigers and bears? I get it. You love animals, but really, why does it matter? And of course, I think this is very selfish that we're the only species that matters, which I completely disagree with. But for somebody who does actually think that, we're going to be just fine. Who cares if the tigers go extinct? How do you respond to comments like that?
Yeah. These are the only species that we have in the universe. But you're right. People may say, well, it's really sad that rhinos are going extinct, but why would I care? How does it affect me? Well, it does affect you. It does affect me and you because the ecosystems provide services as a whole. And so, you can take out individual species of the ecosystems and it'll still hold together. Like in a way that a brick wall, some of them, if you have a brick wall, just think about how you can take out like a little brick, like a Lego, and that the wall still holds. But you keep taking species out and it's just like you keep taking bricks out and then all of a sudden it's gonna collapse,
It's like Jenga.
And these species took millions of years to evolve. So while biodiversity will come back in the future, it's going to take millions of years. And they are so important for the services that we depend on. Yeah, I did mention the film about even the pollination of our plants. Pollinators are responsible for 75%. They help 75% of our crop species.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, we mentioned in the film like chocolate, cacao, just pollinated by a tiny fly. And without it, we don't have chocolate. But okay, well, we don't have chocolate, so what? We depend on the ecosystem service. And one example, it may not be the best example, but just to show how we're so interdependent. The phytoplankton in the ocean, which we mentioned in the film, it's so surprising. It produces the same amount of oxygen that all of the plants on the land put together. Isn't that amazing? Like, you never think about it, that all this oxygen is produced in the ocean. And they are susceptible, phytoplankton, to both warming and acidification. And so it's not about animals being cute or just being generous about caring for an animal. A clip from Ehrlich, when I introduced Moby, because I wanted to have space for him, but there was a really good clip that Ehrlich said. He said, well, only if you like to eat. You should only care about biodiversity if you like to eat and breathe, If you don't care about it. And, it'll come back in like millions of years. And then he said, that's a long fast. You know how funny Ehrlich is. He's so funny.
Classic Paul Ehrlich, yeah.
That's true, And so if you want to have food to eat, if you want to have a livable environment, then you should care about biodiversity. We are destroying in epic proportions every day.
Boy, we're apparently doing a lot of stupid things. We're tap dancing around the population issue, and we're, failing to appreciate the importance of biodiversity, and we are really pushing other species off the planet and a number of other things. And I want to share another clip from the film that moved me, and this was Moby, and one more reason why I was really glad that you included him in the film, because he says something that few people would, another gutsy thing to say, and you're gutsy, Sophia, so thank you for that. So listen to Moby's diagnosis and prescription.
The fact that we, this weird primate species of relatively hairless, defenseless apes are destroying the only home that we know of in the universe that will support life it's horrifying on a scale that we can't even conceive of. Which is why, I feel badly for humans, but there is a part of me that just thinks that, if we can't change ourselves, if we can't learn how to live in sort of sustainable harmony with the only world that will support us, we need to go away. And the other thing is, we will go away.
As a relatively hairless human, I take offense at that.
He's right, and people told me, oh, you can't include that, that's all negative and dark, and you shouldn't say that. And I was like,
It's so raw. It's true.
It's the truth. And no, of course, I'm going to include it. I said, yeah, there's nothing much more to add to those words of wise Moby. He's right, We're just not changing our ways, and we have to, or it's going to be bye-bye humans. But the problem with that is that it's not just bye-bye humans. It's bye-bye humans with all the other species that we're taking down with us. And I actually told him, because we're so adaptable, we can build things to bring out water. We're so adaptable that if we go, what chance do the other animals have? The wild animals, they don't stand a chance.
And you made a good case for how we depend on them. They're a part of our life-supporting ecosystems, but now you're making the other half of the point, which is they have a right. They have a right to live. We do not have a right to take away their lives.
Right. And if I can add on to another really great thing that Moby said in the film that stuck with me was he had a Christmas wish one year, which was that there would be some technology invented to remove all of the carbon from the atmosphere. But then he said, I don't know why I would wish for something like this, because what would we really learn as a species? We'd have this short-term solution, and then we'd just go back to business as usual if our problem was solved. And, it made me think about our current COVID pandemic, which is after a vaccine is developed, and it will be, are we going to go back to just living out our lives the way that we did without any fear of the next one? And there will be another one. This isn't our last pandemic. And when I tell people that, they think it's silly and that I'm being dramatic and that it's probably not going to happen in our lifetime. And this is all we have to worry about. It's just right here, right now. We just have to get through this and everything will be fine. And that, unfortunately, is the mindset of a lot of people all around us. And it's because we have access to these quick fixes. And when something like that is given to us, we don't really learn anything, and we don't do the hard work that it takes to actually change our behaviors. Behavioral change is not easy. It's something that requires time and effort and just establishing good habits. It's day after day and sticking to your core values. And if we can do that, like he says, we're learning something. We're getting better along the way, but we're not really improving upon ourselves. If we just expect for some quick fix, we're doomed to repeat the same mistakes.
And that's, I think, a lot of the focus of a lot of environmental organizations. It's like, oh, instead of the plastic bags, we're going to have the bag that comes out of coconuts or something, the hemp shoes, And that's why, I'm very grateful for the outreach and the activism that you guys do, because it really does kind of come back to that, to the scale and magnitude of the impact on our planet. Plastic bags is a disaster. And if we all want to switch to carton bags, well, then they say, well, that has a much higher CO2 footprint, and it costs more CO2 to transport them, and it costs trees. We all have to do everything to decrease our footprint, obviously. But also, because of the scale and the magnitude of our human enterprise, it's kind of like damned either way. You know, I feel like with all these fixes, like I said, the coconut bag and the hemp shoes, you know, like...
We have to get it so right, and there's so many unintended consequences. That's the complex solution, and it doesn't really end up solving the problem.
Yeah, like if more people actually invested their time and efforts to actually speaking about and educating about overpopulation or overconsumption or our economic crisis, instead of focusing on things like, you know, plastic straws and the bags. I'm not saying these are, you know, pointless efforts. Like, you can still do that. But when you make it your one and only mission, that's a mistake.
Right. Those are things that are easy, you know. That's why I did mention it. It's easy to not use this or that, but that's why population, like, it couldn't be more important that we address this. That's not being addressed. You know, the fact that how we're vastly overpopulated and it's hitting us everywhere. You know, yeah, it's hitting us with animal foods. It's a disaster, and we need to, like, not eat animal foods. Yes. But also, it's a disaster anyway, you know. Cacao in the Ivory Coast is destroying the Ivory Coast because of the cacao that, you know, I love to eat and everyone loves to eat cacao. You know, I'm from Mexico, and, you know, avocados are a disaster over there. They're leveling thousands of acres every year in Mexico because the world has discovered avocados from Mexico and they love to consume them. And everything is just creating such a big impact. And that's why it could not be more important to raise awareness about the unsustainability of our population size. Even our current size, you know, it just could not be more important.
Yeah, and it's really the simplest solution. Fewer of us. It's not really difficult. People are afraid of the solutions, but just, you know, embracing small families. We've demonstrated that we know how to do it, that we want to do it. We just need to amp it up a little bit and celebrate it. So we've circled back to population for a minute, and I'm glad we did, because there was one more thing I wanted to praise you about in the film, and this was something that Paul Ehrlich said. I think we try in all of our activism, Erica, both on the Growth Busters podcast and on the Overpopulation podcast, we try to make this point, but we rarely really just articulate it as clearly as Paul did. So it's really short, so let me just play this moment with Paul Ehrlich.
A lot of people think the population problem is too many Indians or too many people in Africa and so on. Actually, it's too many people in the United States to start out with. You and I consume much more than the average person in Africa or the average person in India, and that's part of the problem.
Ding, ding, ding. Yep.
He's so funny.
He's hilarious. The funny thing is that he doesn't even think he's hilarious. Like, he won't laugh. He'll say these...
I think he knows.
I don't know, because we've interviewed and he, like, says really funny things, but he doesn't laugh. And I'm over here like, oh my God, this guy's hilarious.
No, I think that's just his style. But the part that came right after what you just played is he said, you know, the one resource we'll never run out of is morons. He said morons, for example, say it doesn't matter about the number of people, it's just the consumption. And he says, you know, that's just like saying the rectangle is determined by one of its sizes. And it is. But, you know, and it's funny, like, you know, I edited most of the film, and then I had somebody help me do, like, the polishing of it and the graphics. The person who helped me do the polishing of it, he told me, oh my God, you have to take that out. That's, like, non-cinematic. You're just gonna put everyone off. And I was like, no, like, that's a funny thing, and it's... No, it's like...
It was great.
Yeah.
Yep, great concept, and I loved the little animation you did with that, too. So I wanted to ask you about that editing. So here you are, you're a physician, you're not a filmmaker, and yet you wrote this, you produced it, you directed it, you did some of the editing, and your partner in crime in the process, I guess, was Bob Rapvogel. Am I saying that right? And I guess he shot the stuff that wasn't stock footage, I guess, the interviews. Yeah. And he's an attorney, and yet it is a beautiful film.
That's right. Yeah, he's an attorney. He's into photography, though, so he's kind of knowledgeable about those technical things. He's been doing, like, photography for a while.
Apparently.
In my mind, I was thinking, well, she went through medical school. This girl can do anything, right?
Yeah, I actually enrolled in a community college here in Houston to learn how to use Premiere.
Wow.
And I knew that I needed it so that I could edit the film, you know, because the editing is really kind of almost like script writing, you know. You can make 30 different films. And so I actually enrolled, and Robert told me, you're gonna drop out. What a waste of time. He said, I'm gonna post on my Facebook things you can do with your MD degree. Enroll in the community college to learn Premiere. And I was like, whatever, I don't care. It was at the point when I was finally able to not work full time, when I finally am free to work as much as I want, wherever I want,
Yeah, but let's pause for a standing ovation right here. Bravo. So impressed, so impressed.
Bravo.
Oh, yeah, no, you're silly. Silly. No, standing ovation. So I enrolled in Houston Community College, and I was taking evening classes there, and I learned Premiere, and so I edited the film in Premiere. And so that was super helpful, because every interview was hours, and you had to only pick a few, and so that allowed me to do everything, to go through all the interviews, separate all the clips that I would potentially use, and
yeah,
it's a long work, you know.
There you are. You're the Quentin Tarantino of the documentary world.
Oh, yeah, no, I wish, no.
Another impressive thing that you did was that you shared about having tubal ligation when you were talking about some of the ways to solve this population part of the problem.
Yeah. It's not for everyone, but I certainly did it, and I'm very happy that I did. Like I said, I was completely single and childless when I decided to do that. For some time, I had known that I didn't want to have any babies, so I was like, well, why not just do the ligation, just get the procedures. There's no accidents, no problems, this and that, headaches with this medication. No, I was like, I'm just going to get a tubal ligation. And at the time, I was working at UTMB, and I was like, I'm going to get it right here in this hospital, because it's going to be hard for them to deny it to a doctor who's working here, And I made the appointment, and the nurse was like, what is this for? And I was like, for this and that. And the nurse, as she was getting my vital signs, ready to be seen by the... She was like, they're not going to do it, because you don't have any babies. And I was like, okay, sure, thanks. I was like, of course they're going to do it, And I told them, I was like, no, I want to tubal ligate. And the doctor was like, oh, but, what if I put an IUD today? I'll do it today. I'll put a device today. And I was like, no, I want a ligation. And then he told me, he was so funny, he told me, well, what if you're single, what if you meet Brad Pitt and he tells you that he'll only marry you if you give him a baby? And I told him, and this is not a lie, actually, I told him, well, if I meet Brad Pitt and he asks me to marry him, I'll ask him, well, how did you do on your previous marriages first? Let's talk about that. And I was like, no way. Go away with your child desires and your...
He has enough kids.
You can go away. I'm like... But, and so, yeah, they did. It was a super easy thing. I went home the same day. And honestly, sometimes when life gets hard, I think about that. And that makes me happy. I know that it's not for everyone, but I think, that's something that I wanted to do, and I did it, and that gives me a smile on my face.
Well, we applaud your child-free choice. I cannot claim that. I had 2 children, but then I decided, you know what, I'm going to get a tubal ligation, and they wouldn't give me one. Had to settle for a vasectomy, darn it.
Yeah, and my mother was terrified of me putting it in the field. She's like, Sophia, they're going to say you're crazy. I'm like, no, mother, it's different times. You can relax. It's okay, mother. You're going to get some hate, but actually nobody has kind of said anything about that, which was kind of surprising.
But that story you told, that story needs to be happening less and less. And apparently that's what most women run into when they make that decision. And that's got to change.
I think it's great. I, of course, noticed that, as soon as you said it, I said, whoa, okay, this film gets better and better. I'm child-free for life, so that's obviously why I was receptive to it.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that it can be hard for people to get that done, and it's such an easy procedure, and if that's what you want, you should be able to get it.
Totally.
Can we talk about fish? Because your film said things about fish I had never heard before.
Yeah. Well, the things that I cover in the film, number one, about simply they're decreasing in amount of fish in the ocean. So we are overfishing them. That's a fact. In a very grossly unsustainable way. We're depleting the oceans. By 2050, a lot of projections show that the fish populations are going to be, decimated. I don't want to say fishless oceans, because it's maybe not completely fishless, but fairly close, and that is tragic in itself, and that is ridiculously concerning. Just imagine all the millions of years of evolution that all these fish took to evolve for us to be fishing them dry.
But I don't think there's organizations out there and activists out there trying to convince people not to eat fish. I mean, there's a pretty loud voice today trying to get people to move to plant-based diets, but I don't hear a lot of people saying, stop with the fish.
In fact, the opposite. There's a lot of health-focused communities that will say, eat more fish. You need to have fish in your diet. Omega-3s, this and that. And they're so good for you. At least try to eat it twice a week.
How else are you going to get your recommended daily dose of mercury?
Well, I think they're speaking more about omega-3. So I know even people who take supplements for omega-3s. And I guess, you're a physician, so you probably have a better idea about how that rumor started. If it's so inconsistent with everything that you're sharing in the film, that's really concerning. Because, a lot of us, we care about our health. We want to make sure that we're having a good diet.
Yeah. And omega-3s are very healthy and are very important. However, I want you to understand that fish don't make omega-3s. They get them from plants. Okay? And so fish will eat the plants, they'll get the omega-3s, and then the other fish will eat that. They don't produce it themselves. Okay? And in that same way, we can get our omega-3s from plants, nuts, and seeds as well. The oceans and the waters in which the fish are swimming in are sadly and very unfortunately greatly contaminated with a variety of things like persistent environmental pollutants, And so it's very unfortunate, it's very sad. But you mentioned mercury, the amount of fish that the FDA reported, it was upwards of 70% of the fish sample in the world that had unsafe levels of mercury. It's a problem. And mercury, as a physician, I can tell you, mercury is very difficult for your body to excrete it. So it accumulates in your tissues. That's why pregnant women, it's more of a concern with them because it can cross the placenta barrier and accumulate in the fetal tissue. But, David's not going to get pregnant. So can you not care about mercury? Well, no, because it accumulates even in the heart muscle. It's a concern. Mercury, PCBs are a concern. Plastic is a huge concern. And what is very concerning about it also is how unknown the effects of the microplastics are in our body. It's a brand new field. It's a baby. We don't have research on it. So we see it in wild fish. We see that it decreases their fertility, that it goes into their testicles, that it crosses the blood-brain barrier, it goes into the brain, that it can cause different behaviors. But, we don't know exactly what it's going to do in humans, and that's so concerning. What can I say, you don't want to be eating fish. We don't know what its effects are, and you don't want to be eating plastic. And so, yes, omega-3 fatty acids are great. The fish don't make them. They get them from the plants, and we can easily get them from the plants as well without exposing ourselves to the other things.
Yeah, and apparently you can get plenty of protein on a plant-based diet. That's one of the things people seem to be concerned about. So if you're listening and you're inspired to finally say, okay, no more beef, no more chicken, no more fish, I'm going to eat my fruits and vegetables and I guess grains. I guess it's not that hard. It's scary, but not that hard.
It's not that hard. And in the health section, towards the end of it, I actually showed an example of a person from the United States who was the only American to qualify for the male weightlifting category for the most recent Olympics in Rio. And he's vegan. And he's the only one who qualified, from the US. And I also highlighted a couple others. Scott Jurek, who broke the record of the Appalachian Trail. And there's some other films that focus only on that. There's one film, if you're curious, that's called The Game Changers. It's on Netflix. And they focus only on athletes. And they show them doing their weights and sweating and doing their big, running and competing and winning medals. And, Schwarzenegger's actually on that film. But it had a lot of high profile people help the production and give them money, from James Cameron to the tennis player Novak Djokovic and a lot of famous athletes. So you may enjoy that one as well.
My wife is just making the change right now, so I think we'll watch that film, and I think she's going to drag me along with her. I've been, kind of 80% plant-based diet and haven't quite made the final leap, but it may happen here in this household. We'll see. And in part, thanks to inspiration of heroes like you.
No heroes, but I'm glad that you were inspired in any way.
We have found many reasons to think you're a hero, and I cannot thank you enough, Sophia, for making this film, and I cannot recommend it too highly to our listeners. Shoot, you don't even have to buy a movie ticket. You don't even have to pay a rental fee. Sophia, out of the goodness of her heart, is making this movie free to you.
Just go on YouTube. Endgame 2050 documentary. It'll show up.
All right. Well, I think that concludes the main event, but don't go away. We're not quite finished. We've got this segment that we recently resurrected that I'm pretty excited about. Honey, I shrunk my footprint. So it's time for that. Every episode we share something interesting about what we do in our life that might be a useful tip for you, or it might be surprising, or you might think we're crazy, but maybe it'll be entertaining. How are we living more lightly on the planet? Who wants to go first?
Well, guess first. Sophia? If it's not too much pressure.
Sure. Okay. So one of them is get a tool ligation, which, decreases your footprint and also decreases your carbon legacy. It's not just your footprint, but the impact that your potential children and their grandchildren and so on will have on the planet. So there you go. There's one.
Well, darn, we can't top that. I guess Erica can.
Almost. I have to wait for this pandemic to pass.
Yeah, be careful.
I'll do mine, which is just pitiful and tiny compared to yours, Sophia.
No small actions.
Yep, they all add up. Imagine if a few billion of us were doing this quirky little thing that Dave Gardner does, which is I try really hard to substitute manual labor for powered appliances, like grating cheese. I do it manually. Opening cans, no electric can opener. Raking leaves, no leaf blower. If I can do it without plugging something in or flipping a switch, I insist on doing it that way. And I think that the carbon footprint reduction of that in my life is probably not huge, but it's little, and every little thing counts. So that's mine for the episode. All right, Erica.
Mine for this episode is sharing your documentary, Sophia. I've been sharing this documentary with friends, family members, and, just trying to educate them because nobody taught me about this. It wasn't until after college I jumped down the rabbit hole and started educating myself about it. So now I hope that I'm getting through to my family and trying to educate them about why it's so important to just do small things like not eating fish. That's been my contribution.
Well, thank you so much for sharing the film with us. That's so cool. Wonderful.
That's neat. Sofia Pineda Ochoa, the mastermind, the hero, our hero behind the film Endgame 2050. Don't miss it. We'll include a link in the show notes to make it easy for you to find the film's website, and you can get on the email list there so that Sophia can communicate with you when she's up for an Academy Award or something like that. And we'll also include a link to meetyourfuture.com, which is the nonprofit that she's been involved in to support plant-based diets. So thank you. Come back anytime.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for everything that you guys do. It's such an important work. Thank you. You're the real heroes. And now we're getting into you're the hero. No, you're the hero. No. But no heroes here. Well, you guys, not me, but yeah, thank you guys for everything you do. It's so wonderful. It's so nice to be on your show. I'm really grateful.
Thank you, Sophia.
Thank you very much.
Great conversation. Before we wrap up this episode, I do want to share a quick little news thing that just came across the transom today, Erica, so I imagine it's going to be news to you.
Ooh.
There's apparently a new book by Michael Schellenberger. Do you remember that name, Michael Schellenberger?
Sounds very familiar.
Yeah, his name came up when we were dissing Andrew McAfee's book, More from Less, The Surprising Story of How We Learned to Prosper Using Fewer Resources. That was episode 35 of the Growth Busters podcast, Decoupling Nonsense. And Schellenberger used to be with the Breakthrough Institute. He's long been a non-hero to me because he is, really what I think is he's becoming the new Julian Simon.
Not a good look.
Yeah, seriously. So for those of you who might not know about Julian Simon, he's long gone, but during the last half of the 20th century, he was a notorious business professor, and he was a fellow at the growth-boosting Cato Institute. He was really the enemy of the environment. He spent all of his time trying to convince the world that there's no problem with human population. We can grow human population forever. We'll think up new resources. Copper, one of his famous phrases was, "Copper and oil come out of our minds." Dangerous thinking. Well, Michael Schellenberger apparently was inspired by Julian Simon, but I found out about it from a book review written by Dr. Peter Gleek, who was president emeritus now of the Pacific Institute, member of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, a MacArthur Fellow, winner of the 2018 Carl Sagan Prize for Science Popularization, a pretty smart fellow, and he's written a pretty good roasting of the book, and it sounds like it was really kind of easy to do. The book is called Apocalypse Never: Why Environmental Alarmism Hurts Us All. So we'll put a link in the show notes to this review. Do not read that book unless you just absolutely are a glutton for punishment and you really want to know what wrong-headed thinking looks like.
Or you really just want to read it as part of your book club to bash it, sometimes that could be fun.
Yeah, it's really sad. It's really dangerous thinking. But if you read the book, you really need to read this review because Peter really does a good job of ticking off all of the factual misrepresentations, factual error after factual error. It's a good fact check. All right, had to get that in. Erica, you also have a news item to share before we wrap this up completely.
I do. I am about to launch the first episode of my new podcast called You Had Me at Child Free on August 1st, International Child Free Day.
Yep, that might just be behind us by the time you're hearing this episode. Just depends on how quick you get to the Growth Busters podcast, but we're pretty excited about that. What can you tell our listeners?
Basically, it's a series for anybody who's in a child-free relationship, anybody who is thinking about whether they want to live a child-free life or deciding whether or not to have children. So it's really just for everybody. If you're interested in destigmatizing the child-free choice, you're interested in really redefining what our family structure should look like, and other topics like love, sex, and what keeps people together and in love over time. These are topics that are my favorite. So if you're interested, definitely look for the link in the show notes. We'll go ahead and be happy to provide that.
Yep. Or you can search for You Had Me at Child Free in your favorite podcast app. We're making sure that it is out there. We want to make sure that Alec Baldwin can hear it.
Yeah, and Elon Musk.
Yeah. Better late than never. So that wraps up another episode of the Growth Busters podcast. Don't forget to explore these issues at growthbusters.org. Really want to thank Sofia Pineda Ochoa for joining us, and Erica, as always, it's a pleasure to have you in the conversation. Thank you so much.
I want to go ahead and say also thank you to Sofia Pineda Ochoa, and also thank you to my host and one of my heroes, Dave Gardner. We want to end this episode with just a little bit of this song from the very cool soundtrack of Endgame 2050. This track is by Moby, and it is titled Lie Down in Darkness. As always, you can find us at growthbusters.org and search for Growthbusters Podcast on Facebook, Spotify, and even your Alexa smart speaker. Also find our Growthbusters playlist on Spotify, where I've added this track and more from the soundtrack of Endgame 2050. I'm Erica Arias, reminding you that friends don't let friends miss the real story on sustainable living. Thanks so much for listening.